In Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, a scientist knew every muscle, every nerve, every organ in the human body. So why couldn't he understand the one person he created? Michel Foucault's book, Birth of the Clinic, offers a fascinating answer. The book analyzes medical history from the late 18th century to the early 19th century, a historical transformation that was still unfolding when Mary Shelley published Frankenstein in 1818. Science was witnessing a major transition, especially in fields such as medicine. What fascinates me is that these two books seem to be responding to the same historical transformation, but in completely different ways. Mary Shelley imagines a monster. Foucault, on the other hand, explains the new way of seeing that made such a monster imaginable. In Birth of the Clinic, Foucault doesn't see a natural progress in human medicine, but that it comes with many blind spots. You begin to notice that human beings become objectified over time in order for them to be diagnosed and cured of their diseases. In fact, Foucault actually calls it the medical gaze, where doctors are trained to almost look past the person as a whole. The doctor hones in on symptoms and looks for signs on the body that would explain diseases like tuberculosis. Patients are pulled together under institutions called hospitals or the clinic, where they are constantly compared and contrasted with one another, with charts and tests and documents. The human subject becomes a specimen to be observed as a source of knowledge rather than seen in the context of its full and individual life. I think the most fascinating chapter in the book is Open Up a Few Corpses, where Foucault argues that the most powerful medical advances came from cutting people open, because a dead body, in many ways, is the most objectified human being, without agency or consciousness. And yet, Foucault shows in this chapter how it radically changed how doctors understood diseases. No one before could open bodies to learn about them, but once people were trained to observe dead bodies as sources of knowledge, when the body could be cut open and pulled apart so that every crack and crevice could be scanned and observed, that's actually when or what becomes the greatest source of knowledge for understanding life. This sounds very similar to Victor Frankenstein when he goes into the cemetery and uses the parts of dead bodies to create life. One could argue that Frankenstein takes the medical gaze to the absolute maximum and extreme. The way of seeing doesn't begin with the person and asks what is wrong. It begins with isolated signs and asks what person they belong to. In other words, Frankenstein doesn't start with a person's life as a whole in the context of their life. He starts with the fragmented pieces with their own histories. And it brings up questions like, at what point does a collection of perfectly understood pieces become a person? When do the parts become the whole? Frankenstein's medical vision, one could argue, is so powerful that it is curing the ultimate disease itself, death and mortality. But the major drawback to this scientific vision is that it pushes all dimensions of a human life into the background, because the quality of life isn't about living forever with perfect health. It's about enjoying life, living a life of eudaimonia, as Aristotle says. People with perfect health can still be miserable, and people with bad health can still live with fulfillment and meaning. And Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is the perfect demonstration of looking at a person in a particular way to the extreme. The monster has amazing health, is probably immortal, has strength and endurance to live in the wild, and unlike how the monster is seen in popular culture, the monster is equipped with real education and eloquent speech in the book. He is not a blundering idiot. He's in many ways superhuman, thoughtful, and reflective. Victor Frankenstein has observed and dissected every aspect of the monster's body, but he cannot actually see the monster. He's still looking past the monster. The monster's life is still one big disease, or a life of uneasiness. Everything about him is dysfunctional, not because the monster is inherently evil, but because life isn't about perfect health. Ironically, the only person who cannot see the monster's appearance is the first person to truly see the monster. Contrast Frankenstein with the blind man called DeLacy. Because he's blind, he can't see the monster at all, can't see all the cut up skin and assembled pieces. He has zero medical knowledge of anatomy, but what he does see is the monster as a whole, as a real person. Instead of screaming bloody murder like everyone else, DeLacy actually extends compassion and understanding that could actually heal the monster of his pain and suffering. On the flip side, Frankenstein himself becomes a subject. He's not just a scientist, he's turning into a doctor with a particular gaze, the medical gaze. And that gaze requires him to sacrifice all other aspects of his life, like his health, morals, and relationships, like his marriage with Elizabeth. In the end, just because something is legible or understandable, and even if you succeed in your efforts, doesn't mean you really know or that it's the right way of knowing. It's not that science or medicine is wrong or evil. In fact, its ability to see through the patient is precisely why it's so good at curing diseases. As Foucault shows in the past, the patient or the whole made it impossible to actually see what was causing the problems underneath. Frankenstein's monster is just showing us how incomplete our understanding of human beings are. Every historical way of seeing eventually encounters something it cannot classify. For medieval Christians, those limits appeared as demons. For modern medicine, they appear as Frankenstein monsters. Monsters aren't simply scary creatures. They show us the limits of our frameworks, and in the context of Foucault, different gazes reveal different monsters to show us our blind spots. Every way of knowing still leaves something unseen, that even if something were perfectly legible, knowledgeable, we still wouldn't actually know it. Life will forever overflow the gaze.